Hello. Hi, amazing group members. I already see some wonderful questions in here. Thank you guys for being here. Oh my gosh, people love talking about dismissive avoidance. I see that we already have lots of people in here chatting, asking questions. I have a whole bunch of questions that people submitted ahead of time who weren't able to make the live webinars. So I'm going to answer some of those, but I'm going to start with the questions that are in here first, the ones up until this point. And then I'm going to go into some of the initial big questions that we get asked. And then I'm going to open the floor for you guys to ask as many questions as you want and need, and just make sure that everybody's questions feel answered and connected. So first of all, hi guys. Hi Tatiana and Stuart and Max and Diana and Jessica. How are you? I see you already have some wonderful questions. Hi Marissa. Good to see you guys. And Dan and Nellie. Hi guys. How are you? So happy to see you. So hi Manon and Tiffany. How are you guys? Manon, I see your name come up in comments sometimes on YouTube, I believe, and you always have some insightful comments. Hi, Rizal. Wow, Rizal, I think you were here. Hi, AJ. How are you? AJ, you submitted questions ahead of time last week. And then because you didn't do it on the live version, as soon as we went live, they went away. So feel free to email me those questions too, and I can answer them in future webinars. Hi, Jesse. That's okay. I'm going to remember. I am so good with faces. I never forget faces, but names, I think because I'm so focused on people and their questions and their personalities, names for me like go in one ear and out the other. So I have to work on names, but I will remember from now on that your screen name, Jesse, is that you can't change it, and that's okay. I'll remember who you are, even though your screen name is different. Yeah. So good. Yeah, it's so nice to have a community. Hey, Ryan. Ryan, you're amazing. I'm excited you're here. You'll get a lot out of this webinar. You guys are wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to go through. I'm going to start with the questions that were up here at the beginning. And keep in mind as well, something that's really important to me as I'm going through this whole process on the school and with all the students of the school is that, like, to me, I can have a plan, and my plan can be do fearful avoidant content, anxious attachment content, all these different pieces of content for the live webinars, but feedback from you guys will always trump any plans that I have. So if you guys are like, hey, I want to see more dismissive avoidance seminars because that's where I'm struggling, let me know, email me, and I will always make changes and tweak, because I had so many people for this one who aren't able to attend live reach out to me with questions upon questions upon questions. And so to me, I'm like, okay, that's feedback that there's a lot of curiosity that's taking place in this category. So I am happy to do an extra webinar if you guys want that on this topic. Just let me know. I would super appreciate the feedback, and maybe I'll even do like an extra webinar during the week sometime, or just extend an extra webinar to dismissive avoidance again. So, because I think a lot of us maybe find dismissive avoidance confusing at the beginning, and it can be really challenging to sort of figure out how to navigate the dismissive avoidant relationship. So, first and foremost, Jessica says, is it normal for dismissive avoidance to immediately seek a new relationship after a breakup? Do these new relationships usually last? How does this affect the 6-week mark for when they start processing the breakup? These are great questions. Okay, great. I see you're posting these because you can't attend the whole thing. Yeah, beautiful question. So is it normal for dismissive avoidance? I wouldn't say that there's like a pattern so much one way or the other. I would say that the actual pattern for dismissive avoidance and how they handle breakups is to deactivate and shut down and try to repress their emotions further. And then they end up feeling them later. And they can end up feeling them later for a number of different reasons, but we'll go through the different types. So usually they'll start to really feel emotions maybe 6 weeks after. Sometimes I'll hear dismissive avoidance say to me things like, the relationship, I sort of pulled away and it wasn't work, or, the relationship didn't work out. And then I didn't even think I felt bad for for weeks. And then all of a sudden, weeks later, I started to really feel something. And then I repressed it. And depending on the length of the relationship, the grieving process for dismissive avoidance can be really painful. I would say historically, the worst pain that I've seen individuals go through after a breakup, the ones that are in the most pain, believe it or not, are dismissive avoidance. But that's not necessarily after short breakups. It's usually after longer breakups. So you want to imagine that to a certain degree, the level of pain we will experience in a breakup will be somewhat correlated to how much unresolved pain we have around our parents from the past. Because if we felt, for example, emotionally abandoned, let's say you're a dismissive avoidant, and you feel extremely emotionally abandoned as a child, but you repress it really early and you keep trying to push it down and cope by self-soothing, by disconnecting from people to stay safe, by not having to expose yourself to the potential of feeling those things again. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to go through life and you're going to try not to feel, try not to connect, try not to feel, try not to connect. And eventually, when you do, or if you do, and then if you connect deeply and, at length, then what's going to end up happening is that when you do have this deep connection, you do open yourself, you're basically re-exposing yourself to that level or degree of vulnerability that you felt in childhood. And then if that does not work out, some of the pain that is felt by the dismissive avoidant will be like relative to that. They're not just experiencing, because this is how triggering works. You're not just experiencing the pain from this moment, from all the pain of the breakup, but it's the breakup plus any stored subconscious unresolved pain from the past, because your subconscious mind stores every memory you've ever had. It consolidates them and kind of tweaks them around over time, but it stores those memories and it stores them with the emotion intact. So when something painful touches an abandonment wound that you might have from way early in childhood, you're not just experiencing this pain now at a conscious level, but your conscious mind goes to your subconscious and says, essentially, hey, what feelings are familiar here? This feeling of abandonment. And if your subconscious was like a filing cabinet, it basically throws all the files forward, like, hey, it's all these feelings. And then that's when we're experiencing a lot of pain. So breakups are very painful for anxiously attached individuals, fearful avoidance. For some dismissives, they almost seem as if they get off and they don't even feel too much. But usually when there's a lengthy relationship and there's been some kind of deep amount of vulnerability, I actually see dismissive avoidance suffer the most. And again, this isn't always the case. This is for like those more intense versions. And they'll sort of sink into like deep depressions, major withdrawal, a lot of isolation, those sorts of things. But it doesn't usually happen until quite a bit later. So that would be it sort of fluctuates, right? So if there's a longer amount of connection and there's been safety and vulnerability and things like that, dismissive avoidants are in a lot of pain over a breakup. If there's a short amount of connection, then sometimes dismissive avoidants will be able to get away with repressing their feelings almost altogether and seem to sort of move on a lot more quickly, but they won't usually start to feel the breakup too much until around the 6-month mark. And so Jessica says, is it normal for dismissive avoidants to immediately get into new relationships? I would say that sometimes, yes, we'll see dismissive avoidants get into rebound relationships, but most of the time, I wouldn't even say most, I'd say like a little over half the time, they'll just spend time alone in isolation and kind of push people out a little bit, or just get really busy doing other things. It's not so much like it can go either way. It's not so much that there's a pattern either way there. It's the pattern is that the dismissive avoidants go into strong deactivating strategy mode for as long as they can. And whatever strategies they feel most comfortable with are going to relate to how they basically cope with that time period. Okay, does that make sense? So it's not like a pattern that they will or won't get into relationships. It's basically a pattern of like them deactivating and just using whatever coping mechanisms they have. For some dismissive avoidants, if they have a substance abuse issue, they're going to go, right into their substances more than ever. If they struggle with alcohol or whatever it might be, they're going to go a lot further down that rabbit hole. If they're thing is working all the time, then they're going to dive right into work and be an extra workaholic for that period of time. So it's almost like you can think of the breakup magnifying whatever parts of the dismissive avoidant are already prominent in their personality. It's going to magnify their coping mechanisms, whatever they might be. And obviously the root pattern will be that there's some kind of deactivating component that pushes away the need for deep human connection and vulnerability. And if they do get into a relationship, to answer the last part of this question, how will this affect them around the mark where they start processing the breakup? It will definitely depend on how long you've been in a relationship for. If you've been in a long-term relationship where the dismissive avoidant is going to feel as though a lot of their security, their identity, their vulnerability, their connection, like if they felt like a lot of that is around the relationship, like let's say it's been 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, then the dismissive avoidant is going to feel it a lot, and the breakup's going to make them the rebound is going to actually make them just miss the breakup even more, and they're going to end up pushing that person away more likely than not. Or if it's been a short period of time, then the breakup might the rebound might serve as a distraction, and they might actually be able to move on a little bit more quickly that way. But again, it's going to depend on the level of vulnerability, the depth of connection. There's so many other factors that it's not just a black and white pattern this way. And also like how the relationship was. Sometimes dismissive avoidants don't leave a relationship, but they start healing from and getting over the relationship for weeks or even months or sometimes years before they actually leave. And in that case, that would affect the breakup also. So I hope that answers all those questions. And Tatiana says, Jessica had a question along the same vein. Do dismissive avoidant ex-partners ever want to fight for a relationship post-breakup? Okay. I would say strongly that dismissive avoidants as a general rule are the least likely. This is a very clear-cut pattern where they are the least likely to fight for somebody post-breakup. It's not in their perceptual worldview, essentially. Like they're not ones to be like, okay, this wasn't working. Let me do something about it. Let me show up differently. They're more likely to think of it this way. They really value their autonomy and their space and their decisions and their independence. So if the relationship doesn't work, they're not likely to go try to convince somebody that it can work, because we as human beings, we tend to project from or through our perception. So if I perceive that autonomy is super important, I'm much less likely to go to you and try to tell you that I think you should want the relationship back as well, and we should fight for it together, because I'm going to be too busy thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. That's going to infringe on your autonomy and your needs. And so from their worldview perspective, it doesn't really make logical sense. Nor do they like, on top of that, the vulnerability component, which is basically like, hey, let me be super vulnerable and show up in a way that's going to expose me to the potential of rejection. Not likely to do. So from that twofold perspective, it almost just like conflicts at a deeper level with who they are or their personality structure. And so they're the least likely attachment style to fight after a relationship and try to make it work. They might fight a little bit or try to hold on a little bit as the breakup is happening. Sometimes I'll see that, where they're like, wait, are you sure about this? I don't know if I want to break up. I don't know if, I don't think that's the right thing. And they might do it from that perspective, but once it's done, they usually close down very, very strongly. So I would say that's the general pattern. And accountability for them looks like them noticing how they showed up and what was and wasn't working in their components, their parts of the relationship, and working through that and trying to move and grow beyond that. That's how the dismissive avoidant generally sees accountability. These are great questions. Oh, wow, there's lots more questions. Okay, so let me just see. Hold on. What I said I would do is I'd go into the other questions that were sent to me and then come back into these. So I'm just going to rapid fire some of these questions and just give like sort of quick answers. I like to be so thorough, but I want to make sure we get through all of them. And again, I'm happy to do another dismissive avoidance seminar, webinar. I've been doing seminars in person for a very long time, so I keep thinking they're called seminars in my head. Okay, so this person does not Okay, so somebody reached out to me. This is a really interesting question and said, I feel like my dismissive avoidant partner doesn't love me as much as I love them, specifically because they're dismissive avoidant. Is this true? So I would say definitely not true in all cases. 100% not true in all cases. How do we know this? Just by looking at the world, right? Sometimes we do have anxious individuals leave the relationship first, or fearful avoidance or secures leave the relationship first and move on faster, and all these different things. But I can definitely see how it would feel like that. And I think anybody who's ever been with a dismissive avoidant in this group, I bet a bunch of you have been, and I bet you've all wondered that on some level at times. And I've taken it upon myself to ask so many different clients from different attachment styles very deep and personal questions, and as a means to understand them and to get them to understand themselves. And one of the interesting things, because I've asked very similar questions along these lines, is that they take the relationship for granted more easily, but they don't love the person less. In some strange ways, it's almost like their attachment, I don't want to say is more, because that's not true, but they definitely get very deeply attached. But number one, they take a lot longer to attach. But I would think of it as like, I'm trying to think of some analogy to explain this, but you can think of it just from, this won't be an analogy because I can't think of one, but you can think of it as like, for the amount of work it takes for them to open, it's almost like they love that much harder in a sense. Like when they really do get vulnerable and they really do get safe and they really do open, it sort of matters a little bit more than if it's really easy to open and close and it's really easy to just love and be open, and that's your natural state. So it's almost like they kind of cherish it more because they had to work harder for it and towards it. But because their emotions are repressed to a much greater degree than any other attachment style, they may not feel those emotions as much on a regular basis, which can lead them to take the relationship a little bit more for granted, as well as they assume that everybody wants the same level of autonomy as they do. Because remember, like I was saying earlier, we tend to project from our perception. So for example, if I love relationships and love and love, connection, I'm going to, if I was unconscious or not aware, I would assume that everybody has the same amount of interest and care for relationships as I do. And then if somebody showed some kind of display of a lack of care, my subconscious mind would go, oh my gosh, for me to act that way, I must really not care about a person. So because they're acting that way, it must mean they really don't care. When in reality, a lot of it actually has to do with that we have a different set of priorities in our subconscious mind called our personality needs, if you've done that course. And for the dismissive avoidant, as an example, they tend to value autonomy and freedom and independence higher than relationships, connection, all those different things. And so they naturally project that everybody else must feel this way. And so a lot of the time, dismissive avoidants are busy honoring the independence of other people and honoring their own independence and sort of valuing that more, like prioritizing that first. So between that and then them not necessarily like feeling their feelings to the same degree, those two aspects of the dismissive avoidance personality are going to lead them to naturally take relationships more for granted than the average person, especially somebody who's really feeling their feelings a lot and who's has like a very high priority cycle of like their personality needs are like emotional connection, romantic relationships, social time. Like, if those are the governing priorities of the subconscious mind, obviously that person's going to not ever take relationships for granted, or if they do, it'll be very rarely. So I hope that makes sense. But it can look like they don't love as much, but it's that they're loving through a different set of priorities and their emotions are repressed. But because it takes so much work for them to get that depth of connection, usually when it's there, they almost like hurt more if it goes away, or it takes them longer to bounce back and recover. And it reinforces those cold, sort of painful wounds that say, people don't love me, I can't fully be trusted, and I can't be vulnerable. It does hurt in the end. And so sometimes their healing process after a long relationship and a breakup is actually a little bit more challenging than other attachment styles in different ways. And again, this is not always the case. These are just patterns that I see. So great question. Another question: how do I create a safe space for my dismissive avoidant to open up without fear? So, consistency. This is the big word, consistency. And as you, I want to like draw a diagram. As you are more consistent, you'll see that the openness happens more often. You can't. The worst thing to do with a dismissive avoidant is go from like 0 to 60. Like if you have been in a rocky place in your relationship and you're like, tell me everything, tell me all your deep, dark secrets and your feelings, and you dive way too far in too quickly, you're going to get a lot of pushback, because for the dismissive avoidant to trust and to feel like it's okay to be vulnerable, they need safety first. So they need a lot of consistency of connection. Words of affirmation work very well for the dismissive avoidant, acts of service, those sorts of things. And if those things are pretty normalized in the relationship, then they're more likely to feel safe and comfortable, and that's when they'll start to open up without fear. So really important. And then the same person asked this question too. I am not responsible for my partner's emotions, but are there better strategies to communicate without fear? So a really important piece here is number one, we're not responsible for anybody's emotions. But we need to also communicate our needs. The golden rule is, if you are in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, the only way it will actually work in a healthy dynamic is if you are communicating your needs and seeing them through like crazy. If you don't have that rule, you're going to experience a lot of problems in that relationship. And the reason is, conflict is born of a perception of imbalance across time, space, energy, or matter. So if we are in a relationship and we are giving, not receiving, that's going to create resentment, frustration, conflict. Then it's going to come out in not so nice ways at times, through criticism or negative words or pulling back or punishing or manipulating to get your needs met, or all these, sort of unhealthy components that can come up. And all that's going to happen as a result of that is there's going to be pain, frustration. When these things come up, they're going to hurt the dismissive avoidant, who's very sensitive and fragile to criticism, things like that. And they're going to pull back even more. And then you're going to feel more triggered. And then there's just going to be this spiral. So you need to communicate your needs. Just do so. If it's a very new relationship, this is a lot tougher, because it's, it can be like in the early stages and it can be challenging. Just communicate your needs in tiny, tiny ways, like little breadcrumbs here and there in a positive form. Like, hey, I love when this happens. Hey, I always appreciate this about relationships. I love when partners do that. Just little things that are like getting the ball rolling. And then make sure when you're in the relationship and it's a committed relationship and you're connected, that you are consistently showing up, speaking up about your needs, seeing them through, and doing it in a positive form. And then when they meet your needs, validate them and reinforce them, because so many dismissive avoidants tell me things like this all the time. I want to meet my partner's needs, but I'm just afraid that I'll try and I won't be able to do it, or I'll forget and I'll fail. I want to meet my partner's needs, but I'm afraid they're going to expect something from me, and then I'm going to feel trapped and like I can't do it. I want to meet my partner's needs, but I'm afraid that I am not capable, and they're going to see that something's wrong with me, or that I'm not good enough, and then they're going to want to leave. There's a lot of like self-doubt and the dismissive avoidance belief in their ability to function effectively in a relationship. And when they feel self-defeated, what's their coping mechanism? Withdraw and hide. And so positive reinforcement is really important. You want to encourage this person, hey, you're doing a good job. You can do this. You are capable. And that will help you to see your needs through. I'm going to answer one more question from here. There's like 5 other ones in here. They were great questions. And then I'm going to go into all the chat for a little while. So another really good question somebody asked me is, are crushes deactivating strategies? And the answer is yes. And this actually happens for both fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance. For anxiously attached individuals, usually they're just activating strategies, not always, but like you'll just have a crush because you just want connection and you want your feelings. It's not like a strategy to maintain distance from your partner. But sometimes dismissive avoidance will develop crushes or feelings and things like that when their needs are not met. This is the root cause for almost for why almost anybody develops a crush while in a relationship with somebody else. It's because they have unmet needs and they're not talking about them. But where the anxious perspective is like, oh, I have a crush because I'm trying to get those needs met and I want connection and relationship and closeness. For the fearful avoidant, it can be a little bit of that, but also a little bit of, ouch, my partner's not meeting my needs. It hurts me. I start to feel rejected. And so I shut down and then I'm looking in other areas. And if you pay close attention, any fearful avoidance in here, if you can almost like watch your life in slow motion, usually you feel slightly rejected because your partner's not meeting your needs for whatever reason. It could be that they're away, it's a long distance relationship, they're whatever it is. It could be for a multitude of reasons. You perceive it as some kind of rejection or disconnect. It hurts you. And soon after that, the general pattern is that you start to suddenly get little feelings or little, a need for attention from others or a little bit of crush or flirtation or whatever it is. And usually it follows that track. For the dismissive avoidance, usually a lot of their like crushes will come early on in the relationship where they don't want to really commit and settle down. But once they do open and they are committed and they are settled, that generally stops until needs are unmet. And then for them, it's more like, see, relationships aren't good. They aren't okay. It hurts to be vulnerable. I'm giving up my freedom when and that it's happening at a very unconscious level, which is almost like producing some of those feelings. And yes, it is a form of deactivating strategies. Same thing with thinking about the ex, right? We know dismissive avoidants have a tendency to sort of like think a lot about an ex-partner and fantasize about them. And it's coming from that same space. So these have been amazing questions so far. I'm just going to check in with these other comments in here and start answering some more questions in the chat here. YouTube is a really good idea for live webinars, easier to use. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Max. I appreciate that. Jessica, I am a fearful avoidant myself, and I have a hard time distinguishing between what is a trigger for me and what should really bother me in a relationship, like when I see him flirting with other girls. Okay, so in the emotional mastery course, this is a great question. In the emotional mastery course, I feel like I learn from all these questions every time because I'm like, that's a great perspective and thing to talk about and bring up. In the emotional mastery course, one of my favorite methods, and I do this religiously. I still do this every night. Maybe I skip some nights. I do like 6 nights a week, 5 nights a week sometimes. But it's the emotional processing sheet. So I like to think of like your emotions like food. Like we're going to have input coming in, experiences coming in. And if we don't properly process and digest our food, then what's going to happen? Well, if our digestive system just stopped working in our body, we're going to create a toxic environment over time. And the same thing goes for when we're in this space with our emotions. If we have all these experiences coming in and they're sort of building up, and we have this experience with our partner doing something we're not sure about, or if we think it's okay, we have this experience at work, we have this experience with a friend and family and all these things. If we don't take the time to emotionally process through these things, work through our stories, identify our needs, create strategies to get those needs met, if we're not doing that work, then there's just this buildup of emotional residue, and eventually our internal reality becomes its own version of a toxic environment. And so what we need to be able to do is do emotional processing work. And the reason I bring this up in reference to this question is because our emotional processing work is always highlighting 2 things. Let's work through the stories first, okay? And the reason we have to work through the stories first is because, like, I'll give you an example. This is personal. So I, the other day, was feeling like a friend of mine who was helping with a whole bunch of different things, I started feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm being taken advantage of. What had happened is this person was pushing me for something that I was helping them with at a time when I already had lots of things to do. And one ongoing thing I work on in my life is boundaries, because I like love people and I feel for other people so much. So I sometimes will like over commit to things and then be like, wait, hold on a second. I have to make time for myself and my needs and all this stuff too. So this is sort of my ongoing thing I have to be conscious and aware about. And I sort of fell off a little bit in this area. And I started feeling a little bit of frustration or irritation towards this person pressuring. And not pressuring, but she was saying to me, can we do this now? I really need to get this. Da, da, da. And it was sort of, it was me like just doing something to help. And so I felt frustrated. And the first thing I did is I went, okay, what am I feeling about the situation? What am I making this mean about me? And I went, oh, I'm being taken advantage of. And then I asked myself the question, is it true? Can I actually know it's true that I'm being taken advantage of? And when I look, it's like you get these amazing little insights. I'm like, no, because if I had just set a boundary or expressed that hey, I'm really busy right now, I would love to help you on your clock, but I'm unfortunately not able to. Here are some other times. When I'm able to take that story out, I can realize that, hey, it's actually me not setting the boundary first that is leading to the situation. Now, not every time we're in a situation, it's our stuff. Sometimes it's a combination, but usually there's a point of growth or awareness that we can learn about ourselves and be accountable for our part. So if I hadn't done that first, I might have instead just gone, oh my gosh, what do I need right now in this situation? I need space from this person. And I might have said, hey, I can't help you. I've already done so much and da-da-da. And I might have said something that was very unconscious. But because I was able to question my story first, then when I get to my need is not triggered with any form of irritation. My need is like from a higher perspective. It's from the awareness of what's leading up to the situation. And I also have my point of control back, realizing, hey, I can do something here to create a healthy solution or strategy. And so when in the emotional processing work, it basically lays out those steps. It's like, notice what's triggering you, identify the emotion and the meaning you've given to the situation, question it, and try to disprove it if you can, because a lot of our stuff is just stories. And what the disproving does is it will help you to recognize your part and then ask yourself what the need is. And so when Jessica asks this really wonderful question, which said, I have a hard time distinguishing between what's a trigger versus what should bother me, like what I need in a relationship. Always work through the story first and then always express your needs second, because usually it's not one or the other. Usually if something bothers you, it's a combination of both. Usually there's an unmet need or some kind of frustration, and then your brain goes over it and gives meaning to it. And we want to peel back the meaning, and then we want to understand the need, and we can trust ourselves that the need is coming from a balanced and healthy space. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And like the example Jessica used is when I see him flirting with other girls. So let's do this example. Let's pretend this is the situation. What would the meaning be that we might give to this? I'm unworthy of love. I'm not good enough. Let's just use the example of I'm not good enough. So you make it mean I'm not good enough, and that's why he's flirting with other women. How are you going to act when you go to express your need? Well, one risk you could run, there's many plausible potentials, but one risk that could come up is you might be so afraid of not being good enough that when you go to say that you don't like that he's flirting with other women, you're also afraid of losing him because you've subordinated and you think that you're not good enough and he's up here. And now you don't even fully express yourself because you're afraid of loss instead of being true to your feelings and what feels appropriate and okay for you. So it can go in like all these different directions. So we work through the stories first. Is it true that I'm not good enough? Could it be something else instead? Could it be that he's not very good at managing relationships? Could it be that he's unaware that he's acting this way? Could it be that he's trying to get a reaction from me in some way? You want to work through whatever it is and then get to your need. And your need, I mean, it's very fair to set a boundary and say, hey, I don't mind if, we have friends or friendly, but these are the things to me that feel like flirting. And to me, those are boundaries that are being crossed. So identify what it is for you, Jessica. As for anybody in this group, is it being touchy-feely? Is it, making comments that are flirtatious or over complimentary? Is it like, get clear on what those things are for you that you find are crossing a line, and express from that space. And that will help you to set a boundary, but always trust yourself and use that process to work through the story first, get to the need second, and you'll feel when it's the right need. You'll be like, yes, this need will help, and this is the right way. So I hope that's helpful. That was a really good question. Stuart, I have a question. I'm trying to find my core belief regarding physical intimacy. I've got close, but it's been quite elusive. The intimacy seems to be okay when I initiate it, but not when my partner initiates. Not when my partner does, which isn't fair. My thoughts are, don't touch me, just leave me alone. I'm trapped. Yeah. I'm being controlled, and this person wants or needs something from me, which I can't, or I'm unable to give. My feelings are annoyance and frustration. Excellent. This is really normal for dismissive avoidance. Dismissive avoidance, here's why. Usually you're in a bit of a subtle state of fight or flight. And so when we're in fight or flight as human beings, we're like, let me hoard my resources. I'm not reproducing. My biological self is not interested in reproduction or sex when I'm busy trying to survive. We're not like, survival and reproduction are almost two like separate opposite things. So number one, because a lot of dismissive avoidance tend to be in like a low level state of fight or flight, like almost a constant like 3 out of 10 of anxiety or irritation kind of in the background. Not constant, but it's like it's sort of in that state a lot more. When somebody comes and tries to get in your space, our survival mechanisms come up, and it's like, no, stay away. I need to protect and stay safe. So that's happening at one level, just so you know. And then it's the meaning that you give to it. So what I see the most is I am invaded, I am trapped, I am helpless. These are the thoughts and beliefs that come up. So it's sort of like, think of it this way. Let's say you're the dismissive avoidant and you feel like your partner wants to have sex with you, is initiating sex with you. And then you might go, they expect something from me, or they're initiating and they're trying to trap me. They're trying to, all these different things. Some of the things you even said, I was thinking them as I was reading the second part to your question, but it would be like, I'm trapped, I'm helpless. You might feel like, you're being invaded and this person expects things from you, which will again just trigger feelings of being controlled, helplessness, trapped, those sorts of things. So I would just work on a couple of those core beliefs. And then I would also create like needs strategies around that. So do the reprogramming work on those core beliefs, and also practice, if you want to. Don't do this if this is like, I'm going to be very careful with how I say this. If you want to work on repatterning some of that because you would like to feel like it's okay and it's safe for sex to be initiated, number one, only do this if this is something you would like to do. But sometimes when I've worked with individuals who have experienced some kind of like sexual abuse trauma, and then they're trying to be in a healthy relationship and have sex again, we work on like basically through exposure response, reconnecting them in the moment. So again, pre-qualifying that this is a safe partner, a trusted partner. There's never been any issue. The partner's checked in. They know about the sexual abuse trauma. They know the partner's working on this. They're holding space for a safe environment. Like, we have a lot of pre-qualifiers here first, but it's okay through exposure response to expose yourself to the situation and to try to relax into it. So for example, your partner initiates sex. This is very applicable to dismissive avoidance. And when you're in that space, your nervous system is like, get away from me. This person's trying to take me, my resources, take my energy, take whatever it is. And for you to remind yourself in that moment, hey, it's okay. This person's not trying to trap me. If I need to set a boundary at any time where I'm not comfortable, I'm entitled to do so. And I am safe. And this is okay. And it sounds funny because I know, Stuart, this probably isn't like you might not have any kind of like history like that with sexual abuse or anything like that of that sort. However, most dismissive avoidants feel that kind of fight or flight mechanism amplify because it's just that same biological response. Whoa, I'm in survival mode. I'm not in reproduction mode. And when somebody tries to force me or initiate sex, I start to feel like, whoa, you're taking from me. And we can correct that pattern through trying to slowly over time connect to those experiences and then let ourselves know that we're safe and we're okay. But again, you have to have like good self-judgment, and there's all these pre-qualifiers to make sure that your partner's safe. So use that advice very carefully, please. And I'm not advising anybody to just go and do this. This is about like you checking into your process, making sure that you're safe in the process, and everything like that. Okay. These are great questions, though. And this is extremely, extremely common amongst dismissive avoidants. I don't think I've met a dismissive avoidant who didn't have some sort of resistance at times to sex, their partner initiating, or just any sorts of things like that. And a lot of it, too, is because you're not rooted in your body a lot of the time. If you're a little bit dissociated, you're not going to be as connected there. And also, the more vulnerability you feel like there is in the relationship, the more it can sort of trigger you and the more you'll want to withdraw. That's why dismissive avoidants usually are like really comfortable with sex in the early stages of a relationship. And then the more vulnerability they experience over time, suddenly like the sex starts to be sort of pulled back a little bit. Okay, as an FA, is it very hard to give up on? Great question, Stuart. And like such an important topic for us to talk about, and on so many levels, because this is a question and just feedback and conversations that I get all the time from individuals. So Tatiana says, as a fearful avoidant, very hard to give up on a long-term DA partner because you see that pain, that desire to show up, but the inability to do so, and you want to help make it better, but you can't. You can't make the choice for them to take action to make it better. Okay, so really great points here. And I'm just going to say something again that's like a universal, don't ever forget this sort of point. It is beautiful to see people's pain. It is beautiful to recognize it. It is beautiful to understand it. And for those of us, which I imagine is basically every person sitting here in this conversation right now, and most members, if not all members of the school, when we have this awareness, it's a gift. Like, it's a beautiful gift to be able to sort of recognize these things and patterns in others. But when we have a gift and a capacity, we have to be able to meet our other aspects of self at that same level. So, for example, that gift becomes an Achilles heel if I can see everybody else's pain like this, 10 out of 10, easy. I recognize all of it all the time, very quickly, but I don't recognize my own feelings and emotions to that same degree. I only see my own in real time at a 2 or 3 out of 10. And what this is going to lead to is a lot of patterns of self-sacrifice, self-betrayal, self-abandonment, which will inevitably result in some form of resentment or frustration towards a partner, and then some sort of outburst or unhealthy pattern or something like that. So while we don't want to minimize a gift, we want to maximize balancing the scale so that we are loving and treating ourselves equally to others. And the ideal is that there's a balance of both sides. I can love, I can give, I can share, I can connect with other people 10 out of 10, and I can do the same for myself. So it's never, we don't want to ever really be more or less. We want to be coming from a space of equality. Like, I can see my own needs as much as I can see yours. I can validate my own feelings as much as I can validate yours. And when we lose that balance, then we become self-sacrificial, and this is when we get into unhealthy patterns in a relationship. So it doesn't matter what your attachment style is. It matters that you have the ability and capacity to set boundaries, which can only ever truly happen in a healthy way when we are able to tap into our own individual feelings and needs equal to those of others. And I hope that makes sense, because it's a very important point. Yeah, and Stuart, Max says this, Stuart, is your partner aware of how you feel? It's great to share. I was afraid to tell them. Tell them where it comes from. Tell them what your experience is, and that it's something you want to work on, because otherwise it's a self-abandonment, right? It's, I just pretend that it's okay to have sex when it's being initiated, even though I'm not interested, or even though I feel frustrated and annoyed. And this is a betrayal of your own boundaries. So remember to share that and set the boundary, and say, hey, I'm working on this. I'm willing to hold space around this. Or are you willing to hold space around this? And make sure that conversation is safe. If it's not safe, it won't work. If you don't feel safe having the conversation, the pattern will keep repeating itself. So I know it's scary, and I know it's really vulnerable and hard, but it's so normal. So normal. I wish you could see all the conversations that other dismissive avoidants have. And you want to honor this part of yourself. It's just a part of you trying to protect you. And you want to have this conversation and show up. And that's when you'll start to see the pattern transform. So thank you for sharing that. AJ, can guilt actually make fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance not reply to messages, etc., rather than guilt making them feel to want to act? Example, AAs would jump to reply to messages and would feel guilty if they didn't. Okay. I laugh because this is actually something I personally had to work on in like a variation of this. I'll tell you the story. So I was a fearful avoidant by nature. And in my healing journey, I had like excessive chronic guilt. Like I felt guilty for the silliest things. I actually won't share how silly some of the things were because it's embarrassing. But I would feel guilty to the extreme. And this is a very unhealthy pattern. This is debilitating. Until you have your guilt in check, it's going to show up in all these funny places in your life, and you're going to self-sabotage things because you think you're not worthy, and like all these patterns are going to come up. So guilt is extraordinarily important to work on. It's why I put it in one of the first 8 courses in the school, because it's an underrated. There's a massive link between chronic illness, like autoimmune disorders, any kind of chronic ailment, and chronic guilt and shame. So really, really important from even a health perspective. And I've seen many people over the years, and every single person I've seen who is struggling with some kind of illness is also struggling a lot with some kind of guilt or shame component. So I remember noticing, and it was as I was going through my journey, that my mother would tend to call me on days that I was like super busy, and I was like, I had already done a whole bunch of healing in my life, but I hadn't really gone through the guilt, work. And so I remember noticing that my mother would call me, I think it was like a Tuesday at the time or something. And it was like, I'd be like, why does she always call me on my really busy day? And usually I would forget to call her back because I'd be really, really busy for these like 2-3 days in a row where I was working all day and then doing these things in the evening for these events and then going back and sort of in the cycle. And so I would realize on like Thursday, oh my gosh, I didn't call my mother back. And I would feel all this guilt. And then the first thing I would want to do is like run away, like feel like, oh my gosh, I can't even talk to her. What am I going to say? I'm going to like, I have to apologize so much. And it was like that level or degree of guilt that I felt. And here's the important part. It's because your brain projects emotions onto things, and your brain is wired to avoid pain. So my brain projects guilt onto the situation with my mother and then tries to avoid the situation with my mother as a subconscious strategy to avoid guilt. So this is very normal. And we have 2 different like behavioral approaches generally. Anxious tend to have approach-oriented behavior in relationships. Avoidants tend to have avoidance-oriented behavior in relationships. And this is like a thing. This is across all cycles of life, not just the career, finances, everything. We usually have approach or avoidance strategies. And so fearful avoidance can flip-flop on either side, but dismissive avoidance, generally whenever they feel guilt or like a pressure expectation, it makes them withdraw big time. So yes, it can actually make them not reply to things, and it's up to that individual to sort of notice their patterns there and do the work, and also to value their own boundaries enough and self-worth enough to recognize, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. Like that doesn't mean that I lose my worth. It doesn't mean that I'm unworthy of love. It doesn't mean that the world's crashing down. It means, hey, I made a mistake. And the faster I can make my mistakes okay and accept myself, the more easy it is to come back and develop closeness and healthy relationship bonding patterns with others. So it's a great question, AJ, and it's absolutely true if somebody told you that. I see it a lot. Dismissive avoidance tend to go like this. Fearful avoidance feel like tremendous guilt and tend to withdraw. Dismissive avoidance tend to feel this assumption that the person is mad at them or upset with them, and then feel frustrated that so much is expected from them, and then they hide. Does that make sense? So different sort of patterns here. So these are wonderful questions. Okay, so I lost the track of questions here. Give me 1 second. I scrolled too far down by accident. Oh my gosh, I thought there weren't that many questions, but there are a lot of questions. Okay. I have a secure, looking forward to this one. I'm secure and I have a close friend who's DA, and I recently triggered him or her from a very harmless comment I made. Yeah. Menon, I would just tell the person, hey, that wasn't my intention. I didn't mean to trigger you. And if you want to express your needs to me, I'd be happy to adjust whatever the comment was. I bet it was something about how dismissive avoidants are very sensitive to criticism. We'll just say that. And I bet it was something about maybe even how there was an expectation or they felt invaded or something of that sort. So when you just let them know that that wasn't your intention, that will help a lot. I really want to, Nellie, I really want to know how to spot a dismissive avoidant right away in order to avoid them. Are there key characteristics to look at? So I have a video on this. It's like profiling the different attachment styles. You may not know a dismissive avoidant at the beginning if they're like less of a dismissive avoidant. If they're super dismissive avoidant, you'll see that they're a lot slower to warm up. They're a little bit blunt. They're really good with their boundaries. They tend to speak in like I think instead of I feels. They will tend to be highly analytical, quite intellectual. They'll tend to get anxious or irritable a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit, but a little more often. They will not express too much vulnerability. You'll feel a wall from them at times, but often they can be really charming and wonderful in the early stages of dating. So it might take a little bit to really recognize, but you can look for those little pieces like how they communicate and express themselves, if they share about their feelings or if they're just sharing more about opinions and ideas. Those sorts of things will be differentiating factors. Max is Thais, if you have a DA partner, how to best bring up self-development with them? Any insights? Yeah, so great question, Max. So one thing I would say is, this is actually a really important topic. Anytime that you want to bring something up to the dismissive avoidant, you want to do so in kind of like a non-pressuring way. So you want to make sure you're saying, hey, this is what I learned, this is da-da-da, because they don't tend to take it that well if you say, you should do this. Hey, you should learn about this. You should do self-development. Anything that's like you should, they're like not interested because it feels like there's this demand on their freedom, time, autonomy. Now, whenever we're trying to, I don't want to say like convince people of things, but whenever we're trying to like share something, if we can make a link for how it serves something that they value, they're more likely to take part. But don't do this to manipulate people. Do this to like use it in a healthy way. So for example, let's say there is a coworker and you're like wanting them to take accountability for their part of a project. And let's say they have a really high need for security or safety, right? You might say something like, hey, like, even though you're avoiding this, when you do it and you face your fears in this area, it's going to make you feel more secure long-term. Things like this. So we want to link like what we're hoping to share towards something that they value or care about. That tends to help a little bit. But we want to be careful that we're not like using that awareness to then like convince everybody of things that are working to our interests and manipulating. We want to like share a new perspective that can help somebody without an expectation or some kind of pressure attached to it, so that we're coming at it from like, again, a healthy, balanced perspective. Now, what I find as well is that it's different across the length of a relationship. So if you're new in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, you want to start like a little bit over time and just sort of warm up to, maybe drop some hints and say how wonderful self-development is and how great it is to work on yourself and all these things that you're realizing. And you can link some of it to safety, security. These are things that dismissive avoidants tend to really value. Safety, security, it's intellectual growth, learning, those sorts of things. But whatever you do, don't push. Anything you push, you're going to get equal pushback. So again, introduce it and share it from your perspective, your learnings, the things that you are recognizing, and then I would go from there. But it's a really great question. And that goes with all questions or all things we're trying to bring up with dismissive avoidance in general. And then I see you guys sharing in there. Max, you're such a supportive person. Good for you. Manon says, he disappeared for a whole week. Oh, wow. It was the first time this happened. I felt so bad because I realized I hurt him. I told him I realized I triggered him. He doesn't want to hear about attachment styles because he'd gone MIA, and told him in no way I would ever want to hurt him. How can I be somewhat careful? Okay, great question. So I would just acknowledge this person's feelings. Whenever we want to get through an argument and work to a resolution, we can acknowledge feelings without validating behaviors. So we would just want to say something like, hey, I recognize, so this is for you, Manon. Hey, I recognize that I made you feel invaded, or I placed expectations on you about communication, and that wasn't my intention. And I would like to really value your autonomy, your freedom, and not expect anything from you as a whole. Or not, we can't say that because we want to expect things from our relationships in a healthy way, like intend things with not expecting in like rigid ways. But you can say, I didn't intend to hurt you or cause any pain. However, I would love if we could communicate more, or like basically insert your need there, Manon, about what was originally triggering you or upsetting you in the first place. And then from that, you can come out with like a point of resolution. But validating the feelings, the emotions of what the person felt is very helpful because it brings us back into that space of like connection again. And individuals, all attachment styles, when they feel like their feelings are validated, feel a lot of positivity towards the situation. It feels like they're understood and they connect, and it makes them feel safe again. Let's just see. Some of you guys are chatting with each other here, which is so sweet. Jody says, my DA keeps going back and forth between me and his ex. Does he come closer to me because he feels too much for her? Am I like his antidote? Okay. Jody, I would say this doesn't sound like a good situation, and that my advice to you would be to love yourself enough to set a boundary. And if that boundary means losing the person, then so be it. And I know this is so much easier said than done, especially with different dynamics and attachment patterns. But Jody, go like this. Here's a great thing for any of you who are experiencing having trouble like making a decision that shows up for yourself, which is like everybody at different points in time around different categories of life. Write what it is that keeps you there and just dump everything out. So take a pen and paper, write, why do I stay? If this is hurting you, maybe it's not hurting you. To me, it sounds like it would really hurt. And I would say, why do I stay in this situation? What are all the needs that are being met? What am I afraid of losing? All the fears I have. And then do the work on those things using the emotional mastery tools in the course, which will hopefully bring you to a space of like clarity. And remember, like so much of building our self-worth is about showing up for ourselves in these challenging times. And it might feel so hard and so difficult, but it's really important to set boundaries. And then what I would do from that space, once you've done that internal work, is come up with a boundary that's fair, something that might say, hey, you've gone back and forth a lot. This is causing me pain. And at this point in time, I would like to set a boundary that if you go back and forth again, I have to end the relationship between us. So you either come and you stay and you try to commit, or you go back and that's the end of our relationship. And it's because I have to show up for myself in the situation. And it might hurt, but ultimately you doing that is going to be a major step towards healing and will make space in your life for much better, healthier relationships to come. So please honor and love yourself. I know it can be hard and it can be scary, but you deserve to be able to do that. And obviously you're here showing up and doing the work. And that's the first step of many, many beautiful steps ahead. Let's see. Oops, my comments just went all the way down really quickly. Frederick. Hi, Frederick. Does the connection exist between the 5 languages of love and the attachment styles? Yes. I made a video on this once. Nobody talks about this, but I made a video about this because I realized some correlations. So amazing question. I have a whole video on this, but exactly what you said is correct. Dismissive avoidants tend to be words of affirmation and serviceability. Yeah. Acts of service, serviceability, same thing. I actually put that in the video. And also sometimes gifts, but more so the female dismissive avoidance. Yeah, so great question and insight. And yeah, go check out that video if you're interested. Oh, look, Max wrote in there too. And new. This is awesome. I love too in here and in the Facebook group is that so many of you guys like share opinions and perspectives. Like, how cool is it that Stuart's like, yeah, words of affirmation are important for me as a dismissive avoidant. And it's so cool because we get to hear like individual perspectives, and I think it helps us like really understand things from a different context, and we kind of have like the real life proof from each other's attachment styles. So thank you guys for sharing yourselves with each other in here. It's really nice. Let's see what's next here. I have time as well for another like 15-20 minutes, so I'm always gonna, like I say, an hour, but I like to chat on here, so I'm gonna go through as many questions as possible. In my experience, yeah. So So Nellie says, I don't understand why a lot of people here are trying so hard to accommodate DAs. Why do we have to live on their terms? In my experience doing this, my needs became completely insignificant and ended up at rock bottom. I would rather walk away from someone like this, learn from it, and try to find someone much more secure. So I'm going to put some like really clear answers to this question. Because it is a really great question and a really wonderful point, and I want to make sure that there's some really clear tools here. So I think I said way earlier in the webinar that the number one rule for being with a dismissive avoidant is you have to see your needs through. And what I find, okay, so I'll tell you my story. Let me see. Let me preface a few stories first. So number one, sometimes people are here because, and a lot of people have reached out to me in emails and in different ways over the years and said things like, or clients or whoever, hey, divorce isn't an option because we have 2 young kids. We can't afford to separate. We can't afford to go through this process. And for some people, well, divorce might always be an option at the root level. And of course, you can always walk away. Sometimes we perceive way more benefits than drawbacks in staying or trying to make it work. Number one. And number two, sometimes what we want to do as human beings before we just walk away from a situation is do everything we can to see the situation through. And then if it's still not working to our liking, then we can walk away guilt-free and we can know that we left no stone unturned and we learned and grew from the process. And myself, I met my long-term partner who was a pretty intense dismissive avoidant. I actually met him before I knew much about attachment styles. I had learned about attachment theory in university, but very high level and just, not a big focus. And when I realized what was happening as we were past this sort of honeymoon phase and I was getting to see some of these tendencies pop up, because I met him at a time in my life where I was quite busy and I was only seeing him once or twice a week. So as I started to see some of these things more deeply and learn about attachment theory, I was like, okay, well, I like this person enough, or I love this person, I care about this person enough at this time to do whatever I can and see if it's feasible in this relationship or see if it's not. And if it's not, that's okay too. But in the least, I can learn and grow. And so one of the things that was probably one of the most important lessons of my life is that I didn't even realize how much I was still repressing my own needs, even though I'd done all this healing, even though I'd done all these different things and education and whatever. I didn't realize how much I was still naturally repressing my own needs until I was dating him, because he highlighted it all to me and magnified it all to me like crazy. And I had to learn at this point of time in my life, when it happened, I had to learn to speak up about the littlest things, like the tiniest things. And it got me so in touch with my own feelings and needs on a level that was like, wow, that that was a pivotal life experience. And that helped me to become a more secure attachment style version than I felt that I already was going into it at the time. And this also, what I brought to the table was, hey, you have to learn to give and you have to learn to exchange and you have to learn to be more vulnerable. And we sort of balance each other out. And we're both in a very secure and happy and healthy relationship now that I am extraordinarily grateful for. So it can work. And I've seen this with so many clients I've seen in couples therapy and in couples work. However, Not everybody is at a place in their life at the right time to be able to dedicate and have all the rules and everything. I had all the rules. I was like doing this work for a living already in different forms, not around attachment theory so much, but working with people and doing all this stuff. So I had all these tools, I had all this awareness, I was very well equipped. And you have to be able to have an honest conversation with yourself to be able to say, can I trust myself right now to fully count on myself showing up, expressing myself, talking about my feelings, talking about my needs, seeing these things through over and over, and being able to heal that part of myself through repetition that wasn't doing that as much as I needed to, really, and gain something from this experience so that this became an opportunity for growth. And if the answer is maybe no, shouldn't be in the relationship. Because then, yes, it will be painful. It will be hurtful. So unless this is a relationship that will empower you to show up better in the relationship to yourself and to become more and to connect to yourself more the entire time, then the relationship will likely do some form of damage, and it's important to walk away. And again, with that being said, I understand that there are some times that there are kids and challenging experiences and financial hardships, and sometimes people are married for 25 years and they just learn about attachment theory, and so the situations will differ for different people, but it's an important point to note that it can cause a lot of pain, absolutely, and it can be a growth opportunity, and we have to be able to tune in and see if we're able to do that work. And if life is busy and we have to prioritize other things, or we don't think that the partner will cooperate or work with us and meet us part way, then it's time to go, but then at least you have a concrete answer for yourself. So wonderful point, and I appreciate that perspective being brought in here. And absolutely, Max and Anna in here are saying, yeah, that they're not portrayed as monsters. Absolutely. Like, DAs are not a monster at all. And we could say the same thing, right? Everything I just said about the dismissive avoidant, we could say the same thing for anxiously attached individuals. We could say the same thing for fearful avoidance. We could say the same thing for anybody who's not bringing a foundational amount of health to a relationship. And so we have to make these decisions. Can we take the lessons from them and work with this person and love and come to the table loving ourselves so that we can work these things out? And if the other person isn't responding, isn't getting on board with us, then we have the answers that we're looking for. But at least we took the time to find out 100%. And in the very least, we know what our lessons are going into the next relationships and the next experiences. But any attachment style that's wounded, dismissive, fearful avoidance, anxiously attached individuals, any of them, they're going to bring their own wounds and their own stuff to the table. And so we want to be able to enter into this space, coming from that understanding and perspective that nobody's evil, nobody's bad. All that it is different people carrying different forms of hurt that naturally, wherever we still have unconsciousness or pain left within us, it will naturally spill into the relationships around us. And so we have to be accountable for our part, and we can be accountable for showing up and communicating the things that can help us to not have that unconsciousness spill on from others onto us. But those two components are necessary. And if there aren't changes to those patterns, then it can be very painful and challenging. Okay. So, yeah, I love that, Stuart. I have a hurt inner child who's trying to survive the only way he knows how. Stuart, thank you for giving that level of vulnerability and honesty to yourself and that gentleness. That is the essence of how we heal. And that's beautiful. And Nellie, when you share this story about how this person hurt you, I hear that this is not a healthy person for your life, and you don't need to have that validated from anybody outside of you, right? At this point in time, your situation, your dynamic with that person, whoever it is in your mind that hurt you, there's a hard boundary there, and it's obviously there for a reason. So it's wonderful that you're noticing it, and it's important for you to keep respecting your boundaries and to trust yourself in your boundaries and not to have to need any validation from outside of you in any form. So thank you for sharing that perspective. So Linda says, why does DA not get that in order for it to work? He has to give. He wants me in his life to fulfill his needs, but nothing for me. See, this would be a really good example, Linda, is Like, we want to say, hey, there has to be an exchange, there has to be a compromise. But if somebody's not willing to meet us halfway, keep in mind, for a fearful avoidant, this could be the fearful avoidant can't stop having like emotional outbursts and becoming volatile sometimes, or yelling, or and they're not, they say they want to stop but they don't. Or the anxiously attached individual can't ever respect space or boundaries, and they keep overriding boundaries. Like, for different attachment styles, it can be different things. But the really crucial point that I want you all to deeply understand is that when we express, when we try, when we do it in a healthy way, when we're consistent, we've done this for, days, weeks at a time, seen our needs through, tried really hard and shown up, and then there's still no movement, it's not the right relationship. And if there are stipulations, you have children and you're unwilling to leave, and I don't believe in staying together for the kids, but if there's all these things, there are so many parts of the human experience that we can't go through every single potential situation in this conversation. But of course, there will be times that there are other stipulations there. But I would just set some really firm boundaries, express yourself constantly. And if you don't see any movement after you've expressed yourself kindly, gently, and you want to give it like a few weeks for the dismissive avoidant of seeing your needs through, expressing in the positive, asking for your needs to be met, positively validating when they are. You can start really tiny so that the dismissive avoidant thinks that they are capable. So for example, like, hey, can you pass me the water? Oh my gosh, thank you so much for your thoughtfulness, or for taking the time to do that. Like, that's kind of a silly example because it's a little dramatic and over the top, but like little tiny things, and build up, build up, build up. And if we're just not seeing anybody budge anywhere, then we need a relationship where there's still an exchange of energy. That's part of what a relationship is. But it's a healthy exchange. It's not you give everything to me and I give everything to you. It's I can meet my own needs and I'm perfectly capable at any given time, and I feel healed and whole. And then if you want to come and meet some of my needs too, and I can meet some of yours, that's exciting and that's beautiful and happy. And that's the idea. And sometimes we'll falter. Sometimes we'll have vulnerable chapters or seasons of life where, oh my gosh, I'm a little extra needy in this season of life, or, I need you to carry a little more weight of the relationship in this season of life, and I'll take a turn next. But these should be little variations, not these huge imbalances, because then we're just getting into really unhealthy patterns. I see Jody trying to share that that individuals in this group who are working on themselves are different than some other DAs. And that's, of course, can be quite true. But I just want to make a note here. Like, we're sort of like looking at the DA perspective. I would say the unhealthiest attachment style, and I know this having been one, is generally fearful avoidant. And so I think dismissive avoidants are the most misunderstood as a general rule, but any unhealthy attachment style is going to have things to work out. Okay, so we have to look at it from all perspectives. So this is beautiful. Hi, John. How are you? This is a great question. A large part of my relatives are dismissive avoidant. I feel emotionally rejected around them. How can I be like them without worsening my dismissive avoidant pattern? It's a great question. So I would want a little bit of clarity, John. I'm so curious as to if, I just saw your comment further down, Stuart. I'm a little bit curious as to what about what they do makes you feel emotionally rejected. Is it just because they're cold and shut off? Okay, let me give you an example, actually. Okay, so so most of you know my long-term partner is a dismissive avoidant, or like I can't say is anymore because he's not anymore, but like was quite a dismissive avoidant. And I remember the first time. I should be careful saying too much on here if any of his family ever takes a course or something. But I remember the first time I went to his family holiday and realizing that his whole family was like very like that. And I remember thinking, oh, it feels kind of cold here. And for me, I'm like super warm and I just want to connect with everybody. And I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm like too much. So I was sort of trying to find that happy medium. And, as my partner warmed up a lot over time, he goes and he makes an effort to work on his stories. So when his stories come up, so let's say it was just Thanksgiving in Canada, and went to see family, and sometimes feels like, I remember him saying to me one time, like, nobody really asks me about my life. I nobody asks how work's going or anything like that, and I notice it now. And so, sometimes we can, number one, realize, we feel rejected when we personalize it, right? When we make it mean something about us, like, because they're cold, it means I'm not cared about or not loved. When in reality, you're probably very loved by your family. You're just loved in whatever ways are available and comfortable for them. So I would sort of change the story around rejection and see like what's more authentic to you. And sort of like create empowering thoughts, but only thoughts that are real, right? We're not going to say my family loves me, more than any family in the whole wide world. And, nobody loves like we love. Like you want to have thoughts that are like truly deeply aligned with you. Like, and try to look for ways that they show love. Maybe they show love through acts of service. Maybe they show love through words of affirmation here or there, or whatever form. So look for some of those things. And then I would try to share things, whatever you're looking for from them. Remember, we can initiate these things too. So if I'm looking for more connection from somebody, I don't have to wait for them to give it. I can initiate it and slowly over time let it build. And so I would almost, John, if you feel comfortable enough, I would set the intention to show up and begin that connection. Whatever needs you want from them, try to initiate you meeting them and others and expressing them a little bit, or just naturally sharing them within yourself. So maybe you have a need to feel supported. You might ask somebody for help while you're there. Maybe you have a need to have acts of service initiated or given to you. Maybe you ask for an act of service. Hey, do you mind going over there and passing me that thing? You can do things that initiate this love as well. It doesn't have to be on autopilot and that we wait. And this is an important lesson for anybody from any attachment style or any background. So thank you for that beautiful question. I hope that's helpful, John. And let's see here. There are so many other wonderful questions. Okay, you guys are chatting a lot too, which is beautiful. Yeah, great job, Stuart. Yeah, AJ, if your ex is fearful of avoidant, I remember you saying that before too, she'll feel really guilty easily. So you can tell her, like, hey, don't feel guilt, but try to meet the need when you can. At the verge, hi, Marty. At the verge of letting go of my dismissive avoidant, possibly NPD partner, and I'm probably FA. Question is, when is it time to let go, and should you hold on? Gut feeling or checklist? Okay, great question. If you think it's to the point where somebody's a narcissistic personality, we should probably go right away. And the reason is, attachment styles can change. Attachment styles are patterns of attachment trauma that are in the subconscious. Narcissism, we don't want to be in a relationship with a narcissist ever. But we could potentially be, I don't even want to say this. If somebody is working, I have seen personally, I've worked with individuals who are narcissists who truly do change. Very, very, very rare. They don't usually volunteer themselves to come into therapy, although they do sometimes, a couple times. And a couple of them end up being just like beautiful, beautiful people. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. Like, narcissists are just individuals who are hurt. I like to think of the narcissist as like there's a wounded 5-year-old in there emotionally, but then intellectually they're like really smart and far ahead. So imagine like, a 5-year-old and their emotional capacity at the time with like crazy intellectual powers and ability to manipulate situations and discover things and understand like human behavior, but not be healed in an emotional space. It's going to be really destructive. So it's the pain is an innocence, but it's not a healthy situation. So Marty, I would just remind yourself that relationships are about how they make you feel. And if you don't feel good in the relationship, then it's not a good time to be in the relationship. So if you see this person working on themselves like crazy, showing up, trying so hard, doing the self-work, admitting their faults, meeting you where you're at, you're expressing your needs, the person shows up. If you're seeing all these things happen, then I'd be like, you know what? You could have a little bit of patience. Very carefully. I'm still on the fence about even saying that. But if you don't even see any movement, you think the person might be a narcissist, and there's a big struggle, then even though it's really hard to let go and move on, it's also really important for your own healing, for self-love, for self-worth, and whatever you take from yourself out of the, like, whatever chapter of healing or season of healing you have to go through will only be something that deeply nourishes you and gets you back into that healed space again, so you can succeed and thrive in future relationships when the person is healthy. When you are healthy and the person has a chance to get healthy at the same time. So we have to show up for ourselves first. That's like, it's a silly cliche thing, but it's like the oxygen mask example, right? It's like we have to put our oxygen mask on first. Okay. So I'm going to answer one last question, and then I'm going to answer one question. I think a lot of you guys are sharing, which is awesome. Sorry if I missed any questions on here. I think I'm on track. But Max is reposting one, so it looks like I missed one. So Thais, I want to re-engage with an emotional avoidant woman. My plan is to take things extremely slow, starting with likes on Facebook, waiting until I get likes back. Thoughts? Okay. Thoughts number one. My thought is this is the right way to start really extremely slow, connect over time, have lots of patience. My next thought after that was make sure that it's the right person and the right thing. The approach is correct, but make sure that you're doing this because this person is capable of changing. This person is capable of showing up, not because, hey, I like this person who might still hurt me a lot, and I'm willing to be patient and try these new tools and see if it works. You also have to know that there's a chance that this person will reconnect with you and meet you where you're at. To be honest, I want to be careful with what I say. To be honest, if you do the tools well and you're like super effective and show up and you communicate and you show up and you express your needs and you do so from a healthy way and you're non-critical and you build up over time, like I do this work with couples and it works. And a lot of relationships transform like crazy. But when there's a breakup and then you're trying to re-engage, it's a much trickier situation. So I do this work with people who come into couples therapy and they're both open and willing and they're doing the work together and it's amazing. It goes smoothly. But out of relationships and when we don't know the context of the person's working on themselves and we don't know because they're not volunteering to show up, it can be different. So just promise me, I'm not sure who originally posted this, but my dear, whoever posted this originally that Max is reposting, just promise to me and to yourself that if the person's hurting you or the person's not available to you and isn't responding to your strategies and tools, that you will know how and when to set a boundary and allow yourself to move on and heal and do the work to allow full and healthy love to enter. Okay. You guys are wonderful. Thank you, Jody. I'm so glad to hear that. Hi, Ellie. Your first live chat. I'm happy you're here. Hi, Tiffany. I hear you. I had met someone that brought out all my emotions and made me want to understand, see, and feel my own emotions. Not for them, but for me. That's really beautiful. Anna says, dated a DA and noticed he would try to make me upset on purpose. So he would agree to do something. So he would come over and then cancel at the last moment. Okay, so sometimes dismissive avoidants tell me that they test people. Hi, Sasha. Thanks, Nellie. I'm glad to hear that. Sorry, I'm kind of catching up on comments from probably before. My Lucid NG. Hello, how are you? Ellie says, shout out to all the DAs here putting in the work. Yes. Dismissive avoidants have probably the hardest time with self-work because it's the most vulnerable for them. So if you are a DA in here doing the work, showing up for yourself, congratulations. It takes a tremendous amount of courage and you should all be really proud of yourselves. And that goes for everybody. You guys should all be really proud of yourselves for doing this work. It's this journey and I've been through it, going from very unhealed to very healed, but still not perfect and never will be. That journey it's not for the faint of heart. It's like you have to look really deeply into yourself and really sort of do the work and put in the energy, and it's not easy. So congratulations to everybody doing this. And Anna, sometimes DAs tell me that they test people at the beginning of relationships. You asked where that comes from, though, like canceling at the last minute, seeing. Sometimes they test because they want to see if you'll love them as they are, if they make mistakes in the future. Some dismissive avoidants tell me that. Usually ones that are not like doing a lot of work on their journey, but it is something that I see sometimes. So, yes, they can get silent. Absolutely. I have tried so much with great compassion and expressed gently, daringly, and still nothing, only on his terms, I guess. Yeah, Linda, I'm so sorry. But if you've been doing the work, and I've seen some conversations on the personal development school, the forum on the Facebook page, and like, I can tell you're doing the work and putting a lot in, and showing up and showing up and showing up. And if somebody's not moving, we have to be fair to ourselves too. I would ask yourself, like, if I were to put my feelings and needs equal to this person, would this be a fair situation? If I were to treat my feelings and needs equal to theirs, would this be a fair situation? Would I feel okay about this? Because chances are you're kind of putting your secondary, and that's important. Okay, good. I'm glad, Max. And yes, I'm glad that it's you, because I know you've been doing a lot of work and a great job at your work. And so I am glad to hear that, and just be fair to yourself always. Thank you for telling me that. I'm a fearful avoidant, covert narc, not sure if I should give up. Here's the golden rule here. Thanks, Marty. I appreciate that. So, here's the golden rule as well, as if you are like in love, like you love this person, and if we're in love with somebody who's narcissistic, it probably isn't very healthy love. It's probably more like attachment combined with infatuation. But if we're in a lot of love, the one says this. I'm not sure your name, so I'm just making sure you know that I'm talking to you too. If we think this person, we're really thinking about leaving a relationship, my advice, let's just say from like a general perspective, is put everything in that you can for 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe. And if this is not going well, and not minus, this is like if there's not physical, verbal, mental, emotional abuse, right? This is if like we're running into patterns, we're fighting, we're on the rocks, we're not in a good place. When we talk about you think that the person might be a covert narcissist, these things, I'm like, run away and protect yourself and love yourself, and let that person have their own room to heal, right? And maybe suggest kindly that person heals. But if we're in a space where we're like, maybe the person's just having a bad month or whatever it is, you should put all of your energy that you can into doing the work, showing up, communicating your needs, using all the tools, conflict resolution tools, core wound tools, the attachment style tools in each of the courses for how to communicate with the different attachment styles. Apply. You're going to grow. You're going to learn. You're going to practice. And then if you really don't see anything at the end of that few week period, then you have your answer. And all you've at least done is tried, learned, grown, practiced, done things in real time. And just remember, this is all for you and your journey first. But again, very clear boundary. If somebody's seemingly dangerous or emotionally abusive or causing a lot of duress, it's time to go first, and then do the work with yourself, and then apply it to a newer, healthy relationship later. Okay. So last question. I caught up on all the questions. Last question that somebody submitted, and then I super have to run because I have a 4:30 appointment. Let me just see. It's interesting. One of the questions I have in here that somebody submitted was about intimacy and sex, which was brought up because I hear this question all the time. The last question, this is a good one. Do deactivating strategies prevent a partner from feeling healthy and true love? And the answer is not black and white. The answer is, it's like this. There's a beautiful song. It's kind of a spiritual song, and it's called Bowl of Light. And it's by this man named Trevor Hall. And he talks about the whole essence of the song. It's really beautiful. He talks about how we are like love and light. This might sound cheesy for some of you guys, but like I kind of am into the spiritual stuff. So the idea is that like we are love, And when we come into the world as babies, and we're just like open and loving and receptive, and we're not judging and guilting and blaming and shaming and doing all these things. We're whole essentially, and we're loving and open. And then as time goes on and we have pains or little traumas or big traumas, it's like that light. If you imagine this light is coming through this bowl, gets kind of clogged up with stones. Like every little trauma is like a stone. And the whole song is like, don't put your stones in your bowl of light. And the idea is as we clean these things out, there's like all this love underneath. And sometimes we have all these little stones that are sort of preventing us from being loved, feeling love, experiencing love, giving love, right? Because it's hard when there's all these pains. And it goes along with this quote that I love as well. And it's like, hurt people hurt people. Really simple, but really profound. And so what I would say is that dismissive avoidance as they're healing, or anybody who's experiencing deactivating strategies, fearful avoidance, dismissive avoidance, it can prevent them from feeling the love that's truly there for their partner underneath. And I don't mean from just like a spiritual perspective, like your love at the root or anything. I mean, like we can really love somebody as any avoidant attachment style, and we can have a rough moment or a trigger and start questioning the relationship in your mind or whatever it might be. I've been there in the past and done a lot of work through these things, but so it's been a while, but been there, and like I get it. Like you feel at the time like your feelings are so real, like, oh my gosh, you need to push the person away because they're hurting me or whatever it might be. And so it blocks out that you love that person. But how many times has anybody in their life felt they wanted to push somebody away and then like after been like, what was that all about? I never actually wanted to push the person away. And that can be with a family member, it can be a friend. So sometimes just like with anything else, our emotional state and our painfully oriented thoughts, because a painful core wound or trigger is pushed, can cause us to think or believe that we need to push the person away. And in that moment, we've put a stone in our bowl of light. We've sort of blocked ourselves from the knowing that deeper love exists. But healthy love, true love can always exist, but we have the greatest capacity to express it and be in alignment with it for as many moments throughout the day and throughout the years as possible when we are loving ourselves first and we are truly in alignment and connected to ourselves first. The more healed we are, the greater our capacity to love on the giving side and on the receiving side, and to self-love. So that's my answer to that question. That was probably a little too long, but I hope that makes sense. And in closing here, so the one I would give it 3-4 weeks, put everything in, the closing off, and see if the person opens, and then if not, you have your answer. Okay. Thanks for telling me that, so I didn't have to worry. So where you go to submit questions early, you can submit them on the YouTube channel, on the Facebook group, or to this email. This is my email where I will see, I'm typing it in the chat. This is the email where I will see questions, and I try to collect them before the webinar. So yes, next time I'll do another. If you guys want another dismissive avoidance webinar, email me and let me know, and I will do one. We'll do a second one on dismissive avoidance. I know it's a popular topic. And could I put up a link to the song? Yeah, for sure. Let me find this song for a second. You guys, this is a really beautiful song. Trevor Hall, Bowl of Light. I like a lot of this guy's music. It's all kind of like spiritual music. I might play for a second if you guys hear it, but I'm going to put the link as Stuart asked in the live stream. Okay, I will. I absolutely will. Thank you guys so much. Listen, I really appreciate the really sweet compliments, but you guys are the ones here doing the work, and thank you, Jessie. I appreciate that. And I am so grateful, like, to share this stuff and connect with you guys. And like, this is like, I could spend all my days doing this 15 hours a day. So I love sharing this with you guys and hearing about your journey and all of your amazing questions. So thank you so much, you guys, for being here. And I hope you have an amazing Saturday. And I will hopefully see you guys here on Tuesday evening. And if not, let me know your questions ahead of time. Have an amazing rest of your day, guys. Bye. Thank you.